Welcome, everybody, to episode 6 of Beyond the Physique podcast. Today we have a big one. We're going to be discussing healthy and disordered eating patterns. I have a guest with me today. Today with me is Ciara Mittas. Ciara has her bachelor's in exercise science. She's currently pursuing her doctorate of physical therapy. She's a NASM certified personal trainer. She's certified in corrective exercise, an NSCA strength and conditioning coach. She's a coach here at Strategic Aesthetics. She's a success story as well, as she has developed a healthy relationship with food over time. So thank you for being here, Ciara.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so exciting. I feel like I'm living out my dream.
Yeah, we're making it happen.
Life. That intro made me sound so official.
Well,
you're making my head big over here.
You've accomplished a lot of shit in your time so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, so where are you from? What was your childhood like?
So, I'm from right here, more specifically Louisville, but kind of everywhere Canton. I had a good childhood. I'd say, for the most part, it was pretty normal. I grew up a wild child, so grew up a lot of neighborhood boys, beating everyone up. Yeah. Digging for worms, running around. I was so active.
Did you play sports growing up?
I did gymnastics.
Okay.
Pretty much, my mom put me in when I was, 2. Probably a little older than 2, but I pretty much did gymnastics up until kind of development of all the eating disorder stuff.
Yeah.
Led into that a little bit.
It's hard. Okay. That makes sense. So, today we're going to talk about disordered eating, and I wanted to start with defining what a healthy relationship with food looks like, and a couple of those characteristics. So, one of those things, in my opinion, is listening to hunger and fullness signals. Mm-hmm. So, eating when you are hungry.
Yes. And
stopping eating when you're full.
Yes.
It sounds simple, but I think that is an important thing. What's something that you would say is a healthy eating pattern?
Definitely listening to hunger cues is a big one. I think a lot of people, especially in kind of this industry, which in some situations, bodybuilding prep, you can't always use those cues. You have to follow your strict plan.
Right.
But, off season, just everyday life, really learning, am I actually hungry? Am I bored? And running out a meal. You don't have to eat the whole plate.
Right.
Portion sizes at restaurants, they give you so much. You don't have to eat it all.
Yeah.
That, and I think, too, not being scared of certain food groups or, labeling foods as, good or bad.
Definitely. Not having, cutting out entire food groups. I can't have carbs. Yeah. Right? No, you need carbs. Well, you don't need carbs. There's no essential carbs, but they're necessary.
Right.
They're optimal. So I would say, variety and balance is one.
Balance is huge.
Yeah. So, not being afraid of certain foods, like you said, and being able to include them in moderation on, the sweets and the things like that. True moderation. Not, total restriction or total binge either. Right.
For me, a big thing for the longest time, I wouldn't go out to eat at restaurants. I would say no to hanging out with people because I was like, oh my God, food's going to be there. I can't eat this and this and this. And it kind of was, controlled my life for a really long time. And so now to me, if a friend's like, hey, let's go get ice cream. Okay, I don't have to go eat a large Dairy Queen Blizzard, but I can go eat a treat and enjoy it and move on.
Flexibility is another thing that I think is really important. So, being able to adapt to a different situation without a whole bunch of stress. Now, this is outside of contest prep.
Yeah.
And, basically, if you don't have your food with you and you're not going to have to eat off plan, then, ultimately you should be stressed and you should be letting me know about it. Yeah. But, for daily life, outside of contest prep, this is why bodybuilding, in my opinion, it can potentially lead to eating disorders. I don't think it's the root cause.
No.
I think it might bring them out, expose.
Yeah. I think people that already have like underlying history of eating disorders, definitely. I mean, it can make you a really good competitor.
Yeah.
Because you already are so strict with food and you have that previous mentality, but yeah, or
it
like
can also lead to some issues. And so like there's times when I need to shove some carbs down your throat and you need to eat those carbs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. And not compulsively eating, I think, is something that is somebody that has a healthy relationship with food would avoid. So not immediately like, oh, I'm stressed, I'm gonna go eat a Reese's.
Right.
Like that doesn't have to always connect to each other. Okay, so a healthy relationship with food has balance, has a little bit of flexibility. There can be structure to it, and there can absolutely be a plan, but that's not what we're saying here. But it just can't be so restrictive that it becomes like dangerous, you know.
Yeah, you have to find that balance kind of with yourself, and I think every person, what's healthy and balanced to them is going to be different.
Yeah.
So it's very individualized.
So some things that I see that are like early onsets of potential eating disorders are like macro hoarding, right? So if I give somebody a certain amount of macros and they save all their carbs for 8 at night so they can eat a treat, and not just once, but as a habit.
Yeah, frequently.
You know? Okay, so what does an unhealthy relationship with food look like to you, Ciara? What's an example of something that would show that somebody has an unhealthy relationship with food?
I would say, like I said, unless you're unprepped where you need to be obsessively tracking, not being able to function or consume food without having the number associated with it, to me is a really big red flag. Like macros, awesome tool, but if you get to the point where you're no longer using them as a tool and they're kind of like a crutch, that's slightly concerning. You know, having them be the only way you can eat food is if you have everything tracked like day to day. As like an everyday lifestyle.
I would say using food as like a punishment or a reward.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, so you don't deserve extra food because you've been dieting, and you don't need to punish yourself because you had extra food.
Right.
Yeah, so we're human beings, we require food as fuel, you know, so like inherently you deserve food, you know.
Yes.
But yeah.
I think, like I said before, kind of labeling the food as like good or bad. And having that misconception around, you know, I eat this certain thing, it's terrible, it's a bad food.
That like healthy foods and unhealthy food. Foods are literally just nutrient delivery systems, and they carry different nutrients. Yeah,
your body breaks them down just about the same way.
It's just nutrients.
Yeah.
And it either has what you want in it for your particular goals, or it doesn't, you know. It either adds up to what you're trying to do or it doesn't. Secretive eating. That's a big trigger. Big flag. So that's like, you know that you shouldn't be eating this, but you're eating it so when nobody sees it.
Yep. It doesn't count if no one sees it.
Yeah, right. And this is something that alcoholism is a little different, but it's still
similar concept.
And I would say that is one of the transitions an alcoholic might make. That would be a huge indicator that you're going down a bad path.
Yeah.
So, secretive anything, if you're being secret about it, rethink it, you know?
Yeah, why is it a secret?
Yeah. Compulsive exercise, like trying to make up for like, oh, that Reese's I ate was however many calories, I have to go burn that exactly off. Like, it doesn't work just like that, you know?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Nope.
And I've had clients in contest prep have what they call an unscheduled refeed, where they go over, you know?
Yep.
And the biggest thing is I want them to let me know, so then we can fix it. But what I mean by fix it is usually not a shit ton of cardio.
No.
It's usually just like, okay, now now I have to make that up over the next couple weeks, but we're not going to undo that tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, kind of following that idea, like having a night out. Whether it's you go out for dessert that you didn't plan to eat, or you ate something and you feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
The idea of having to get up the next day and kill yourself at the gym, like, it happened. Move on. In a few days,
Right.
if the scale's up, it's going to go back to where it was. Just
and it's going to be up because of water.
Right. There's a lot of factors. It's
There's
not
a lot of
immediate,
factors on the scale.
Oh, I got fat now. Like, no.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. It's
right.
not the...
My dad used to make a joke and say, well, you can't get fat in a day. And, well, I don't know. Some of those days, I think we might have.
Push the limits.
Yeah. So binge eating, that's pretty obvious, but just eating past when you're full, and if that's a continuous habit, then it needs addressed. Compulsive eating, like we said earlier, avoiding it would be a healthy thing, but compulsive, so something comes up that's stressful in your life and your first reaction is to go to food for that dopamine. That would be pretty unhealthy, and that would be basically using food as an addiction.
Right.
So that would be the same as as a drug or anything else. So and then feeling frequent food guilt. So feeling guilty after eating something that maybe wasn't even a big deal.
Right. That's huge.
Yeah.
And it could be something depending on, I guess, the severity of, like, the disordered eating. It could be something as simple as going over your macros, even just a little bit. Some people, that's so triggering that it's like immense guilt, even if it was a banana.
Right.
Like, I had a banana that wasn't planned.
Yeah. And again, context, if this wasn't in context, perhaps a little different, but yeah, if you eat an extra banana and you're over a little bit and it's day-to-day life, like, maybe tomorrow just don't do that. Like,
sweets is a big one for people, which understandably so sometimes.
There's not a lot of benefit to it, but
if you're at a birthday dinner with your mother, like, you can have some cake.
You can
it's
have
okay.
A little piece of cake.
It's life.
You don't need to have the whole cake.
No, but
right.
Balance.
You can have a little bit,
Yeah, and it's not going to kill you.
Okay, so those are some basic traits in normal day-to-day life, like habits, that would indicate a healthy or unhealthy relationship. What are some actual, like, diagnosable eating disorders? And I should also throw a disclaimer out there that we're not doctors and we're not diagnosing you or treating you. This is just something that you and I see is really prevalent, and we're just trying to get some information out there. So, moving forward,
good disclaimer.
What is anorexia?
So anorexia nervosa, essentially, kind of boiling it down into simple terms, it's presence of extremely low weight. Fear of weight gain. Typically there's association with, like, fear of food, and then usually distorted body images.
Okay.
So a lot of that, we call it, like, body dysmorphia.
Yeah, but pretty extreme.
Yeah, very extreme. So, like, looking in the mirror, when you're skin and bones and, like, genuinely thinking, like, wow, like, I'm overweight, I need to lose weight. So you kind of tend to lose the ability to actually see yourself.
Emotion's so high, logic is low.
Yep.
So what does that look like in day-to-day life? So, like, eating-wise, exercise-wise, relationships.
So, from my personal experience, I definitely had kind of more of the anorexia nervosa side. A lot of it really is fear of food. You kind of get into this thought pattern of, like, food is bad. I especially got into the really bad habit of, like, tracking calories. So for me, hitting over, like, at one point, I think it was like 300 calories. If I went over that number, it was so, like, mentally excruciating for me.
Wow.
That I would have, like, panic attacks every time I ate food. So it really is kind of like an obsessive, you're always thinking about food. You really get kind of glued to those numbers. A lot of people with anorexia, at least from my experience and kind of what I've read about it and things I know, the numbers is a huge thing. You get obsessed over your weight. So for some people, that's stepping on the scale 10 times a day. And any fluctuation kind of sends you into a spiral.
So there's an emotional attachment with stepping on the
For
scale.
sure. Circumference, that was kind of my big thing, is I surprisingly didn't care as much about the scale. But for me, it was like, how wide are my hips? What's the circumference of my legs? What's my waist? So it was like a constant, multiple times a day, I'd be in the mirror, looking at things, kind of picking everything apart. I'd be having my tape measure out, writing in my little journal.
Wow.
And then definitely the exercise. Over exercising is another big thing for people. So it's a way really just to expel calories.
Yeah.
So you're controlling it as much as you can. But I know in my depth, I was probably working out at least 6 hours a day. It was all my free time. It was
6 hours a day on 300 calories.
Yeah, it was overconsumption with just a lot of illogic thoughts.
Yeah.
But you kind of get so consumed by it that you don't see kind of the flaws with it.
Okay.
It's just what you do.
Now, so did you notice changes in your energy, changes in the way you felt, slept?
For sure. It was definitely gradual.
Okay.
I think not everyone, but for me, it was started as a really innocent thing. I was just I just want to lose a little bit of weight, and it kind of spiraled. But yeah, the longer it went on, the more I was just exhausted. I remember, because I was in 8th grade at the time when I was in deep depth of it, and I remember walking down the hallway at school carrying books. And at the time, I was, none of my clothes fit. My big old Ugg boots were basically moon shoes on me.
Yeah.
And I remember just having to walk down the hallways and feeling so exhausted and just having this constant fear of I'm gonna trip in this hallway and not be able to get up because I physically don't have the energy. And it was to the point walking up the stairs at my house, I'd be crawling. But I was too consumed to really admit that was an issue.
Okay.
I had to sit in my shower because I couldn't stand because I was just so weak.
You were so weak, and boy, I mean, that physiologically makes sense, that eventually you would reach that point.
Right.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that and how you turn things around. But I just want to go over a couple of other disorders and what they are. So bulimia is basically from binging and purging.
Yeah.
So in that purge could be either throwing up or it could be compulsive exercise.
Yeah, people do laxatives.
Laxatives, for example.
Combination of everything sometimes.
And rumination disorder. So that's something that contest prep, I see people doing that all the time. And it sounds absolutely like something you would not do, but that's basically when you're regurgitating and rechewing your food. Mm-hmm. And when you have such a small meal, and it could happen.
Oh yeah.
Avoidant and restrictive food disorder. So basically, that's just avoiding and totally restricting food. What's your take on this one, Ciara? Could you give us a little more insight on that?
Yeah. So this can kind of come from that fear-based motive. So I think carbs are bad. I'm going to avoid anything that resembles, looks like, is a carb. But this can also come from just certain illnesses, disorders, or maybe you have an issue with textures. So anything with a certain texture, you physically just can't eat. I know sometimes people can develop this after being on medications that makes you sick.
Yeah.
You get to the point where you're so tired of throwing up food from the medications you're on that you just would rather not eat.
Oh, wow.
And then it can kind of turn into I'm scared to eat food because I'm scared I'm going to throw it up. So it's not even about body image at that point. It's really just, I don't want, the adverse reaction to happen. So I'd rather just not eat food.
That's a tough one. Orthorexia. So this is so common.
Yes.
It is so common.
It's so common.
And so these things are all on a spectrum, and the earlier you catch it, the better.
For sure.
Because then it'll keep it from snowballing into something worse. But orthorexia is something I see in the fitness industry like crazy. It's when you're just so fixated on healthy eating that you get physically stressed out when you don't have access to a nutrition label like you were talking, or maybe you're off plan, or you got held up at work and you might have to eat something different. Or you might be like, you might miss a meal. Oh shit, I might be an hour late on my meal. You know what I mean? And having that actually affect your day-to-day life, that's one there. So I think we've pretty much made it obvious, but eating disorders are pretty damn common. They're all around us, and they are on a spectrum. So finding it early is definitely the key to it. So let's talk a little bit more about your personal experience. So what would you say was one of the triggers, or what was the onset of your anorexia? Like what caused?
It's hard to kind of pinpoint a completely specific moment.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of a lot of factors that were happening at once.
Something that developed over time, too.
It was definitely gradual. Like I said, I did gymnastics for forever. So growing up, I was always really competitive. I would say I'm kind of more the perfectionist personality, which tends to coincide with a lot of people who do develop eating disorders.
Yep.
But I remember being in gymnastics, and it was actually a group of the girls I was really good friends with. It was about to be summer, and we were like, oh, we should lose some weight, you know? And me, being me, took it to the extremes. I was like,
I'm
gonna lose the most weight. Like, you just wait. And so it did start off pretty innocent. I remember, looking up, how to lose weight. I actually just pulled up the Pinterest boards I had that were, healthy recipes, Victoria's Secret workouts. Yeah. So it did start kind of innocent.
This 30-day booty builder workout.
Yeah. Then I was like, I'm just gonna, exercise a little bit more, try to eat more vegetables, maybe less Pop-Tarts at school lunch.
Yeah.
So it was nothing crazy. But it kind of just did spiral very quickly, out of control. The one thing that really kind of resonates in my head as something I specifically remember was learning about calories.
Okay.
And so I was tracking calories, but I remember reading, which is essentially a caloric deficit, but to lose weight, you need to be burning more than you consume.
Yep.
And so, now we know that's factoring in what you're eating, but that's also factoring in, what you burn, your BMR.
Your basic metabolic rate.
You need so much food
so
just
we burn
to
calories
sustain.
At rest. We burn calories walking. We burn calories to digest food and during exercise. There's 4 different ways we burn exercise, and commonly when we think about how do we burn calories, well, it's the only calories we burn are on the treadmill.
Right.
A fun fact, that's the least amount of calories you burnt this week. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I remember reading that and taking it very, very literally.
Yeah.
So then it was just logical in my brain, I'll have to do so much exercise to burn off what I'm eating right now.
Yeah.
So it kind of turned into, over time, okay, maybe if I only eat this much,
well, it seems kind of stupid to eat 2,000 calories if I have to do 2,000 calories worth of exercise.
I can eat 500 in no time. And so it very quickly developed into how little can I eat and how much can I exercise.
Yeah.
And then I did definitely develop with that, the orthorexia.
Yep.
So anything pretty much at that point that wasn't plain chicken or a vegetable. was like on my no list.
Yeah.
So it's
I could see how that could become
very, very quickly. I was
problematic.
scared of pretty much every food. And I think with that too, you know, there was just circumstances with like my family, like health issues going on. So it kind of flew under the radar until like one day we went back to school and my teachers were like, whoa. And like they called my mom and they're like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And she was like, oh. Like, and you know, when you see someone every day,
Yeah.
you don't notice big changes like that, because it was a gradual weight loss for me.
Right.
So it wasn't,
But
and I
it's
hid
just-
it under clothes. So it's not like I was walking around in bikinis. Like,
Right.
I was wearing, you know, 3 hoodies, mostly because I was freezing, but
Yeah.
like 3 hoodies and pants and long socks in the middle of summer because I was
Yeah.
so cold.
So, that teacher, would you say that's kind of the culminating moment, or what happened that triggered you that you decided I need to make a change?
So I remember every day, you know, I got weaker and weaker and more exhausted. You know, I was at the point where I was almost scared to go to sleep because I just felt so terrible, but it was kind of, oh, like if I'm sleeping, I'm not burning calories. And so it was just the craziness that was in my brain
Yeah.
and how extreme it can get. But I remember one day I was at school and I was like walking down the hallway, so exhausted, and I knew I had a problem at that point, just with how exhausted and terrible I felt. And at that point, other people were kind of like, hey, are you okay? People were asking me questions. So I kind of got to the point that I was like, I am dying. Like, I was scared to go home and go to bed and do things because I was scared I was going to not wake up. I could tell I was kind of at that point.
Yeah.
So I actually went home one day. I packed a bag before my mom came home. And she came and I was like, Mom, like, we need to talk. And she was like, what? And I was like, I think I need to go somewhere. I need help. I'm trying to get better and I've got worse. So I think that's a big reason why I kind of made it as far recovery-wise as I did.
Yeah.
Because kind of first step to that is knowing you have a problem.
And you were the one to identify it and come up with the fact that you needed to change things.
Yeah, and we had previously, my mom took me to a doctor at one point. I think it was just my pediatrician. And they weighed me. And this was before it, like, snowballed to the extremes. But I remember the doctor being like, oh, she's just, like, a little underweight. Like, she's fine. And so my mom didn't really do anything. And then we did at one point see a nutritionist and, like, therapist.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, I think, quite ready
You weren't
to
ready to
admit
receive
that
it.
I needed it or, like, needed the help. So I think kind of as a teenager, like, no, I'm going to rebel. I actually got worse. So, like,
Yeah.
she's telling me to eat more food.
So,
I'm not.
speaking on my own relationship with alcohol, I got in some trouble, and I believed personally that I was in a bad place mentally, and I just had bad stuff happening, and if the bad stuff wasn't happening, then I wouldn't have acted out of the way I did with the alcohol, right? And then, so after that, I took a year where I said, I'm just going to not drink at all. And I did it that whole year. And after that year, I thought, well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Right? And now my mental state's great. So then I thought I could have a couple drinks here and there with some friends, social situations. And it snowballed again. Found myself back in trouble. And that's when I finally was ready to admit to myself that, hey, I have a problem.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't like the repercussions of what I was doing. So I'm the one responsible, you know what I mean, to change it. So that until you see it yourself, it's so hard. But in that kind of situation, it's hard to see it because there's not logic. When emotion is high, logic is low.
Oh, yeah.
And with an eating disorder or like alcoholism, that's all you have is emotion. You know, so logic is so low. So that speaks a lot on your character to want to change that and take steps. So what was recovery like? And what did you do?
So the day that I came home and was like, Mom, help, like,
Yeah.
I need something, we went to Akron Children's, and so it was kind of immediate. They checked me in, you know, basic procedure at the ER. But I remember, I think that was the first time my parents kind of realized quite how bad I was.
Okay.
Because, you know, the beds they have there, like, there's a scale in the bed. And I remember the doctor reading the number out, and my parents were like, what? Like,
They were surprised
they
at
were,
how low.
yeah, because they just weren't expecting it, or they just hadn't paid attention to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, that was like, and that for me, because like I said, I was more circumference, what I saw in the mirror, pictures versus the
Right,
weight
that
on the
wasn't your
scale.
main.
It kind of was like, to me, I was like, holy crap.
So because you were so focused on the circumference, the weight was actually kind of a wake-up call for you? Because
Yes.
you were, yeah.
And I think, too, seeing the reactions of my parents, like my mom, when they told her the number, just sobbed. She was like, I can't believe that, like, that's you. But so I was at the hospital at Akron Children's for, I want to say 2 weeks. And then they kind of had me working with a nutritionist while I was there, a therapist. Kind of the crucial points when I was still being hospitalized was monitoring, like, my heart. So when you're that malnourished and you don't have any body fat, your body starts to use muscle for fuel.
Yep.
Your heart is a muscle.
Yeah, boy.
That's part of why eating disorders can be so dangerous, especially in, like, the malnourishment zone.
When you're so extremely malnourished that...
Yeah, because I want to
It's
say
just-
my heart rate at night was, like, 12 beats a minute. It was so low. And they were like, girl, you're so lucky you're here right now. But, so it was kind of reintroducing food to my system, you know, watching what my heart rate did, making sure electrolytes didn't skew, my blood pressure didn't go through the roof, because, you know, you're so depleted. As soon as you start refeeding again, your body's sucking in everything it can.
Right.
And so if you're not monitoring that, especially at that extreme of a level, you can have really adverse effects by eating again.
Like extreme edema.
So you kind of have to really slowly refeed, monitor. But yeah, so I was working with a therapist there. When they released me, I had a meal plan. I had a therapist I was going to. And so it was kind of trial and error at that point.
Okay.
When I left the hospital, I was like, yeah, I'm super motivated. Like, I'm going to get better. I'm going to do all these things. And then as soon as I was at home trying to eat again, it kind of was like, oh gosh, like, this is actually a lot harder. You know, in the hospital, I didn't have the choice.
They're a little monitored.
Yeah, they're like,
So
you're
there's
either
no-
going to eat this or we're putting a tube down your nose. And I was like, I don't want a tube down my nose.
I'll just eat, I guess.
I'm going to eat.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was so freaking hungry.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was kind of, like, glad to be eating. I was like, I'm glad someone's forcing me to do this.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't do it myself.
I can't even imagine.
But then going home, kind of having a little bit more freedom. You know, I wasn't strapped to a bed, so I could sneak an exercise here and there. You know, when I could. I got to the point again where I just was losing weight. Because I had to go to the hospital each week so they could, like, weigh me.
Continue to monitor.
Take my blood, just see how things were going. And I want to say a few appointments, my weight was either the same or had gone down. And they're like, okay. So I had a few hospitalizations after the initial one.
Okay.
And then I unfortunately got to the point that I had to go inpatient program.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much you go stay somewhere.
Yeah.
And it sucked at the time. I think it was my saving grace because I had the support constantly around me of people going through the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I had every meal, there were therapists there kind of like walking me through it.
So I think a lot of those programs teach you how to, and I not specifically for eating disorders, but they teach you how to talk to other people. One, they show you you're not alone.
Yes.
And two, they teach you how to talk to other people that are struggling with the same thing, so you can continue that further down your life. So for me, I've done a couple outpatient programs, and with those, I have friends in my life now that also have the same. They're sober, and so we connect.
Yeah.
Frequently, and we talk about those things, and then just relighting that fire of like, boy, life's pretty good when we're not acting, the way we did without all these repercussions, and then keeping that community of people that is like-minded and learning how to communicate with that's pretty beneficial.
For sure. And I think too, like having the support of people who understood, it was almost like a relief to know other people were going through the same thing, because to a normal person who has never had issues with eating, it's like, just eat.
Right.
Like,
you look around in America and anorexia is kind of the opposite of what you see, right? And not to say that they don't have a eating disorder, maybe it's just on the other end of the spectrum. Right. So it's hard for people to understand when food is such. People relate food to pleasure. So would you say, how would you say that your eating disorder affected relationships while it was active, and then how did those improve after you were in recovery and since then, since you've recovered?
So they definitely were very hard on relationships. At the time, I was 14 when I was being hospitalized and out of treatments.
Yeah.
So it was mainly relationships with friends, my family, but I remember just being so tired and so focused on exercising and eating. I was so mean to everyone. That's that's the one thing that still makes me sad to think about, is how awful I treated people, just because I was lashing out.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't really process the emotions I was going through.
Right.
But it's hard to support someone and kind of, I guess, associate with someone going through something like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to gauge how to communicate without, setting off anything. So it was a very, I think, lonely period in my life.
Understood.
Because throughout the recovery process, it was kind of isolating because I had to just focus on what I was doing. But definitely, as I recovered, as I kind of got my personality back, and I wasn't so
You weren't
obsessed,
so isolated. You were able to...
could actually, socialize with people and, go hang out with people. Be nice to people, because I wasn't hungry.
Be nice again,
Yeah.
Okay, so how can those around someone dealing with an eating disorder offer them support? Because I know... currently, there's people in our lives that I know people want to support them, and they don't say anything because they don't know how, or they don't know the right thing to say, So how can someone offer support?
Honestly, something even as simple as saying, I don't personally, understand what you're going through, but I'm here for you.
Yeah.
Or even just, being a person... hey, if you need to vent about things, I'll listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot of it, too, with, treatment and just therapy, it's talking it out, kind of getting the thoughts out of your head. So
giving them an opportunity to be heard.
Yeah. So just providing that listening ear to someone that's going through it.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Because, like I said, it can be a very isolating experience.
Right.
And as someone who's struggling, it's hard to reach out to people for help. So kind of extending that offer can really, really go a long way.
Definitely. So saying maybe offering the help, but then checking up on them too.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to reach out.
Right.
Okay, that's great, they're in my corner, but they're still not going to reach out, even though you said reach out.
Yeah, you have to extend the offer, and then you have to follow through with hey...
So you have to offer the offer, and then you have to shove it down their throat.
Pretty much.
Hey, I'm here to help you, and okay, so what helps you maintain a healthy relationship with food now? So since your recovery, and actually before we get to that, I have another question. So as an alcoholic, I will always identify as being an alcoholic, because as soon as I say that I'm not, then I'm saying that I'm completely recovered,
Yeah.
right? But that comes with the ability for abstinence. So would you say that you can recover fully from an eating disorder? Is that something that you carry for the rest of your life? Or what's the proper term there?
I think you always have the opportunity there that you can backslide and go back into it. I'd like to say at this point in my life, I'm fully, like, quote-unquote recovered.
Yeah.
But I do have to be very honest with myself sometimes, and I have to know my triggers.
Okay.
So for me, I can track my macros, and I can be okay. But if I'm going through a phase where I'm trying to maybe, like, cut down a little bit, I can very quickly become obsessive with it.
Okay.
So a lot of it is being honest with myself of, hey, you're starting to become weird with food, you're starting to isolate yourself, maybe stop tracking.
Yeah.
So in it, ebbs and flows. There's some days, like recently I stopped tracking macros again.
Yeah.
And I've been just eating and doing things and like
Yep.
relearning my hunger cues. And I've been okay. But there's times where maybe I'm having like a bad week stress-wise. And before I know it, I'm like, oh, I've been skipping lunch.
Okay.
I should probably do something about that.
Yeah.
So
It's a constant thing to keep an eye on.
you have to always kind of be honest with yourself, and you have to establish, I think, certain checks and balances. And it really comes down to brutal honesty. Like, if you've gone through something, and I'm sure you've experienced this, like, you know your triggers.
Yep.
You know the way things present. You know the way you react when you may be, like, backsliding or having just certain thoughts. So it's really just being crucial with yourself and
really
honest.
knowing your triggers and then an honest review of yourself.
And then I know, like, a big thing for me too is like the education component. So, you know, even when I was in treatment, before I went into treatment, I was always trying to learn more. You know, before I went to the hospital, I was like, what's the recovery process going to be like? Because I wanted to educate myself and prepare myself as much as I could.
Right.
And so, you know, as I was going through school and kind of doing my own, like, training and, like, eating, I was always researching, like, how is this food being broken down? So
Right.
kind of forming as much logic and education as I could so that if I had a moment of fear, I could be like, no, this is, like, what's actually happening.
So that's it. Education, and I see this as a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But
be.
I really think that I can help guide people through education that are on early onset
Yeah.
of these things by truly explaining the way food works. You know, and just explaining like the law of thermodynamics and like
Right.
insulin and the way we use calories and things like that. So learning about carbs, proteins, fats, and the way they're broken down, the way they're stored, the way they're used can be really, really beneficial. But sometimes we stop in that process and call our education quits.
Yeah.
And that's all the data that we have. And you get stuck with, I need to learn, or I need to burn 500 calories if I eat 500 calories.
Right.
So getting enough education and then being so educated that you overanalyze everything, that could become orthoflexia or orthorexia, excuse me, but
Yeah.
orthoflexia. All right. That's what came out of my mouth. But education, in my opinion, has got to be important, you know.
It's so important. I know. That was a big thing when I was going through treatment that they really harped on. So
That's
this
awesome.
is what this food is. You know, it's not scary. It's not sneaking into your closet at night and sewing all your clothes smaller. Like,
Right.
it's just fuel.
That's
You
funny.
need it. Your brain needs it. So reframing the mind of seeing it as something bad is seeing food as an awesome tool that your body needs to live off of.
Yeah. So, the social standards and the image of the ideal woman or the ideal man. How has this shifted in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, in your opinion, and what do you think that's doing for people?
I think I want to say we're leaning almost in a more positive direction.
Yeah.
So we're no longer, the body image when I was 12, 14, whatever, was very, I guess you'd say, like Victoria's Secret model.
Yeah.
Very skinny, you know.
The thigh gap generation.
Oh my gosh, thigh gap, hip bones,
Yeah.
all of that, collarbones. So it has shifted into a more, I think, well-developed, so I would say more on the muscular side.
Yeah.
Curvy is kind of in.
Yeah.
So it's in a slightly more positive light, but I know also kind of bodybuilding right now and the very like muscular women's physique is very present, which is great, but at the same time
I think we shifted from one extreme to another.
we have, and it's now finding the balance of I want to be muscular, I want the broad shoulders, I want the well-developed glutes, but it's still kind of the little waist,
but the teeny tiny waist, super lean,
which like when you're competing.
So now it's just a little more, so
But
that's kind of my opinion too. So I would say that it's much more common. We're seeing younger women lifting weights.
which is awesome.
It's so
I'm
awesome.
so here for it.
I love it. You know, because they're not like going for walks and like skipping breakfast. Like these girls are eating food and training hard. Yeah. It's awesome. I love that.
Yeah,
and the body
it makes me
image
happy.
has definitely changed to a more healthy and capable body.
Yes.
But I also think that it's gone a little far as the expectation. And I'll speak for men here. When you look at like Chris Hemsworth, you look at Dwayne Johnson, you look at Chris Pratt, Zac Efron, those are like the guys that are the ideal physique, right? But the reality is that's not created naturally.
No.
You know, and it's putting some unrealistic expectations and potentially pushing people into the use of hormones that don't need to be. And I think that with the ideal body image, it's gone from being super skinny to being this like jacked, lean, muscular girl or muscular man. It has improved a lot, but it's still not perfect in my opinion.
Right, and that's, I think, too.
But we do like extremes though, as human beings.
We do. We tend to gravitate towards extremes.
I would say though, I'd rather see that extreme than the completely incapable, unhealthy 85 pounds of.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially, people aren't scared to eat. Well, as scared, I guess. It's no longer preached, like the 500 calorie a day diet, the military diet, like all these crazy diet trends that people follow, I think aren't as common.
They're a lot less common. There's still shit like keto out there.
Well, that's a conversation in itself.
Yeah.
But no, it has shifted, and so I think it's promoting a more healthy image. People are getting after it. They're installing better habits.
Yeah.
Like you said, there are 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, etc., seeing all of these like bodybuilders on social media.
Yep.
And being like, I want to look like that.
I would say that there is a little more transparency in today's world.
There is.
And that would be with the younger folks. So like my example here is going to be like Chris Bumstead versus Dwayne Johnson. Okay. Yeah. So if you talk to Chris Bumstead, let me know. I'd like to talk to you.
I would love to.
Yeah, I mean, I met him for a second. That was cool. But
I'm envious.
He talks about enhancements, like pretty openly, right? And what he's had to do to get where he is.
Yeah.
But he also has like a educated and a realistic and a healthy view of it.
Yeah.
So, like, he's talked about classic physique. He's at the top of his weight class. And he could use a little more drugs and be a little bit less perfect on his diet and get the same look. But that's not what he wants. He wants minimal.
Yeah.
And I like that because he's talking about, like, well, openly, one, like, this is not attainable without that, right?
Yes.
So don't expect it, realistically. And two, I'm not promoting any kind of unhealthy use. And three, I'm recognizing the actual health risk effects in what I've deemed as okay and acceptable as a potential risk factor to get what I'm trying to do. And my bad example would be like Dwayne Johnson here, who is older than, he's pretty old now, and he looks better now than he has in his entire life.
Yep.
And he talks about, I'm here for longevity. Like, no way, bro.
No, you're
There's
not.
no way you are. You know what I mean? You are doing, it's just not necessary.
Yeah.
And then it's creating a look, and it's just not promoting a healthy view of things, in my opinion. We got off of the eating disorder thing a little bit there, but ultimately they end up kind of on the same path,
Yeah.
You end up restricting food to get super lean, and
It can be a vicious cycle.
yeah. So eating disorders are on a spectrum, and they can start small, but ultimately they are very, very serious, and they can end up being life-threatening.
Yeah.
So what are some of the health complications that can come from having like an untreated disorder?
Well, biggest one. Well, the crazy thing is eating disorders of all like the mental illnesses have one of the highest mortality rates.
Yeah.
So, pretty serious, and that's, mental side of it, whether some of that's like suicidal things.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just the comorbidity, so the cardiovascular issues. So, issues with your heart, whether you're so malnourished that your body is eating it, or maybe you're kind of like the bulimic or binging side.
Yeah.
You're skewing your electrolytes, you're skewing your blood pressure. All really crucial things. Kidney failure, all your organs when you're malnourished stop functioning.
Yeah, they need nutrients.
When you're that malnourished, you have a lot of neurological things. So brain fog's a big one. You just don't have the fuel necessary for your brain function, so it slows processes down.
So for somebody experiencing some symptoms, what advice do you have?
Recognize that you have an issue, I think, is the big thing.
Recognize it.
Knowing that it's a thing, knowing it's an issue, admitting that you're having a problem. Even if it's not a full-blown problem, maybe you're realizing, I'm getting a little obsessive over my tracking.
There's a couple things here that would check out.
This could maybe lead into something more. So I think being honest, telling a friend, just asking for the extra
Getting
support.
some kind of accountability with you.
And I think if you're really at the point where you can't turn it around yourself, speaking to a therapist who has experience with that, nutritionist, or at least someone who can give you that education component.
Yeah, get some education.
That's so big.
It. And if you're working with a nutritionist, they will likely, if you're working with a good nutritionist, if you have some of these disordered eating patterns, they will likely point them out to you. And this is them being on your side.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is them caring for you. So if they're asking questions, that is because they care.
Yeah, it's not an attack.
It's not an attack. So personally, if I'm working with somebody that has a disordered eating pattern, I like to know that they have a therapist as well, somebody that they can talk to on that side, because that is not necessarily what I'm certified to do. I'll tell you what to eat and why.
Yeah.
And then we can adjust things as you need. But the mental component of that is
Crucial.
so important.
So crucial.
But I also don't think just having the mental component without having some kind of proper nutrient plan, because
You need both.
a nutritionist that knows you have a disorder is going to cover your micronutrient bases. They're going to make sure that you're not malnourished,
Right.
even with some of these habits. There's ways around things, and they'll work with you on it. So then the symptoms or the risk is reduced while you're healing it.
Yeah, well, that too. And there are some nutritionists who specify with kind of the eating disorder population. So it's a matter of,
Yeah.
I'm going to give you have this many calories, which can be really big trigger. Calories tracking, it all kind
Right.
of connects to being, okay, how can we rephrase this so you're not thinking about calories and you're not thinking of numbers? We're getting a grain in, we're eating a good fat. So kind of understanding how to reframe it in a way that's not going to set you off the edge.
Yeah, there's
running.
meal builder plans where
Yeah.
you can pick a carb, a protein, and a fat,
Yeah.
or have 2 proteins and 2 carbs and
Yeah.
1 fat. Or
Kind of restructures
yeah.
it. And then having, like you said, the therapist to talk you through that.
Yeah.
Talk you off the edge.
Yep.
I think I read somewhere, or maybe one of my therapists described, kind of with addictions too, and habits, is each time you do something, you're actually carving a completely new neural pathway in your brain.
Neuroplasticity.
Yeah. So, kind of going against that sends your brain into what the hell mode.
Yeah.
So you need someone to kind of walk you off that edge. This is why we're doing this. Keep doing it. It's
Yeah.
going to get easier.
So through neuroplasticity and practice, you can rewire the way you think
Yes.
and the way you experience certain things. Yeah. So we mentioned earlier that basically the earlier you catch it, and the easier it's going to be to solve. Well, we definitely talked about quite a bit today.
Took a lot of dips and turns.
Yeah, we did. But ultimately, I hope we brought some light to the prevalence of eating disorders and then the wide spectrum that is disordered eating. And basically, if you or somebody is struggling, definitely reach out to them and be of support. And if you're struggling yourself, I hope this is a catalyst for you to reach out, get an accountability buddy, or find some help. So thank you for being here today, Ciara.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so where can people find you? What's your Instagram handle, your Facebook?
So Instagram, Ciara_Mittas_fitness. Actually, is that my Instagram handle?
Yep, it is. We'll verify.
My brain forgot kind of.
But we'll put it in the show
Yeah.
notes too. So you
We'll
can
put it in the
find
notes. But yeah, you can find me there. DMs always open. Link on the Strategic Aesthetics page.
Yep, strategicaesthetics.com. You can apply for coaching there.
Yep.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Physique podcast. If you enjoyed this and would like to hear more like it, be sure to subscribe. You can also find me on Instagram at Trevor W Training, on YouTube at Strategic Aesthetics, on Facebook, Trevor Woodyard, and you can also apply for coaching at strategicaesthetics.com.